Brandon Johnson is a perfect example of why you need to thoroughly vet and research people before you just vote for them. You cannot just go out there and root for everybody black. That's why I could not get behind when Issa Rae said that on the red carpet at one of those award shows a few years ago, because I said you cannot just simply root for everybody just because they're black, because some of them will be some of your biggest traitors and backstabbers, and Brandon Johnson is a perfect example of that. I don't know if the people of Chicago thoroughly looked into this guy's plan before they decided to vote for him, just because they wanted to get Lori Lightfoot out of office, but they got probably a more worse person than Lori Lightfoot. Now, I can't even really go into Chicago politics like that because I am not a Chicagoan. I can only go based off of what is put out there, and what's been put out about Brandon Johnson has left a lot to be desired. So Brandon Johnson is now being inducted into the Bed-Bucking Hall of Shame because this guy continuously goes out of his way to bend over backwards for those of the south of the Borderian community, aka the illegal immigrants that keep flooding into this establishment and going into Chicago. And he continuously does everything in his power for them on a monetary level. His latest move, let's put it this way, a lot of black people up there are about to have a lot of unwanted neighbors, and it's going to be on Brandon Johnson's tab, and it's probably going to be on black people's tab as well. So I'm going to be reading this article coming from the Washington Examiner that's basically talking about how Brandon Johnson and his administration are about to start allowing immigrants to permanently move in there, to basically move into Chicago into permanent housing, not even temporary, but permanent. Chicago Democratic Mayor Brandon Johnson and his administration are beginning to explore permanent housing options for immigrants who have been bussed into the Windy City over the last year. Finding funds is just one of the hurdles. Since August 2022, over 10,000 asylum seekers have arrived in Chicago on buses Governor Greg Abbott of Texas sent to Illinois' largest city. It was the third Democratic city to receive immigrants from the southern bordering state. Following the immigration influx, Chicago officials have set up immigrants in police station lobbies and large concrete shelters over recent months. That should just tell you that it's way too many of them. They have no room for them, but they're putting them in these very public and open places that they should not be in, but they continuously allow them to stay there. Now, the city is looking for proposals to create a community-based method that needs both obtainable funding and sustainable staff. Johnson's Deputy Chief of Staff, Christina Passion-Zayas, I'm not sure if I pronounced her middle name correctly, told the Chicago Tribune. The Chicago City Council approved $51 million in funding to create housing for immigrants and asylum seekers at the end of May. The state legislature had approved over $42 million in immigrant aid for the entire state, leaving fewer amounts for Chicago and prompting the city to look for additional funds. Now, what's so crazy is a lot of them will come over here to get all these funds. They basically are getting a handout. They'll get all these set asides, and then the next generation comes in via their offspring and then say how hard they worked. No, you didn't work hard. Many of you didn't even work hard to sneak in here. At this point, they have the borders basically wide open for them just to walk right on in. That's why I keep telling y'all that the Republicans and the Democrats, they work hand in hand. Because look at where that border is at. Is a bordering a red state, and they're busting to a quote-unquote blue state, and the blue state allows them to stay. It's literally a whole factory process that they have going on here. Because like I said, if these red states so-called didn't want all these immigrants in here like some of them claim, but they be lying, they would turn them right around and send them back. But they don't. They bring them and let them come in. But then as a gotcha moment, they send them to these quote-unquote blue states. Passion-Zayas said the city is eyeing a $25 million expenditure to provide 6 months of rental assistance for over 6,500 immigrants plus $15 million to address overall homelessness. Now look at who's getting more money. The immigrants are getting $10 million more than the homeless in Chicago. That shows you who they care about more. However, Passion-Zayas noted that the plans for accomplishing these goals are still fluid as the city works to find more immediate solutions to the daily influx of the immigrants. Well, how about this? Why not just not let any more in? There's your addressing of the influx. Look at what Mayor Eric Adams of New York, aka the Joe Biden of Brooklyn, is saying. He's now realizing he is in over his head. This is too much for even him. And now look at what's going on. I have a feeling Brandon Johnson is going to be dealing with the same thing, and he hasn't even been mayor that long. You can characterize our strategy as ultimate resettlement, Taurean Zayas said, adding that it will not be a problem that will be resolved in a period of weeks. We're going to keep that in mind and see what happens in the next few weeks. The city also needs to explore the next steps following the 6 months rental resistance, with officials engaging in conversations with the state about pairing with national employer organizations. Let's be real. We know that folks are going to need some way to sustain the rental after the rental assistance expires. Several migrant shelters across Chicago are at full capacity, leaving immigrants to sleep on the floors at police stations and gather resources to obtain permanent housing. Many are faced with poor living conditions due to overcrowding, and I'm trying to figure out where that is our problem. I'm trying to logically think about how that is our issue. Because remember, Eric Adams out of New York was suggesting that people open their homes to them. Are you insane? Eric Adams, since you want to be the one to open up doors and whatnot, you open your doors and see how that works out for you. Efforts to resettle some immigrants from city-operated shelters to more permanent areas began in April. The Chicago Department of Housing allocated $4 million for a program titled Asylum Seeker Emergency Rental Assistance. So far, 109 households have been resettled into permanent housing, and 285 currently have signed leases or are in the process of moving within the next 15 to 30 days. Of the $51 million approved by the City Council, $47 million will go toward paying contractual staff that runs the shelters day and night, led by contract vendor favorite staffing. However, city officials are discovering quickly that the staffing policies established by former Mayor Lori Lightfoot's administration are not sustainable for the rising number of immigrants in Chicago. What we learned was, and what was very troublesome because it is not sustainable, is that the staffing of our shelters have been done by contractual staff, she said. And in many ways, these are the same staff that have been staffed up healthcare spaces during the pandemic. They are incredibly expensive, they're national staffing companies, and it is not sustainable to move forward. That is not something we should continue to justify. In other words, they are trying to look to expand beyond that. Ultimately, Taurean Zayas said the city will seek proposals for community-based providers either to staff shelters or to have volunteer-led shelters deputized to be a delegate agency. The city is hoping for shelter staff that's culturally congruent, linguistically responsive, and trauma-informed, she added. And we want to make sure that the investment that we are making go into the pockets of Chicagoans. When they say in the pockets of Chicagoans, just understand they're talking about the lawmakers. That's who they're talking about. And if they are talking about the residents, they only about to get dimes to dust. That's pretty much it. Unfortunately, even though this is all bad and it's very unfortunate, this is what Chicago voters voted for. Next time, read the policy. That's why you always got to read the fine print. You got to read the small print. You got to vet whoever it is, because I'm willing to bet it wasn't people on the grassroots that pushed this dude. Now, what I found to be interesting when I was reading this article is that even though it's attached to Brandon Johnson, you got more quotes from people within his administration, more so that Taurean Zayas individual. Like, that saw that name more than Brandon Johnson, even though it's about what Brandon Johnson is doing, because at the end of the day, he has a team behind him, but he's like the final person you have to go through in order to make something pass. So it's amazing they find money for all these other groups to just come right on in and just plant themselves there and basically get a major head start over those people who have been there for way longer and are still trying to get a start, or a very good significant one. And like I said, in about a generation or so, you're gonna have them saying, we came over here with nothing and we worked our fingers to the bone. We didn't have no help, and you know, we advanced, and now look at it. They gonna make up so many fallacies and leave out the part about how they literally was able to leapfrog over the people that are there with all these major financial incentives. Like, they're looking, keep this in mind, they're looking to put them into permanent housing. All they had to do was be from somewhere else and come over across the border and have a sob story, and boom, they got the red carpet treatment. Meanwhile, black people up there, and I'm more talking about the people that didn't vote for this, are still struggling. And then they'll say, oh, well, you know, they didn't work hard enough. So they claim. I remember talking on my channel a couple years ago how it was a construction site that was being worked on in Ward 8 in Southeast DC, which of course is like the blackest ward in DC. And how they put out a memo that they wanted people who were from that ward to come and work at that construction site. Yet when the people tried to work there, when they showed up, it was a bunch of south of the Borderians from Maryland and Virginia. And they were like, wait a minute, the memo stated that you had to have people from that area working there first, and then you branch out if it came to that. And I remember black people went up there and protested about it and had the memo in hand, and those south of the Borderians who was working there ended up leaving the site. And what was crazy is you had people who had no idea of the story literally giving their 2 cents, saying, oh, those black people were wrong for doing that. I said, no, they were not wrong for doing that, because you have a documented memo saying that those jobs were offered to them first. And what they'll do is they'll try to lie and say, oh, black people don't want those jobs, or black people are lazy because it's not paying enough, or they just don't want to do them, and this, that, and the third. No, the truth be told, and not just in that story, but in a lot of situations, a lot of black people will do those jobs, but any black person worth their grain of salt is not going to work for pennies. They want to get paid what they feel they are worth, just like every other person who has common sense. But what they'll do is they'll lowball it and then try to claim that black people don't want to work, or that we're just lazy. No, that is a lie. And many people know it is, but in order to keep up appearances, they will go ahead and peddle that lie. Just like they say, oh, Asians are so smart. Want to bet? Not saying that there aren't any smart ones, but as a collective, do you want to bet? Or that the south of the Borderians are some of the hardest working people? How much you want to bet that too? So all I gotta say is that just constantly just do your research about the stuff that they do and the policies that they implement, who they're against. It's pretty obvious at this point.